All right, it looks like everyone's back. Thank the representative for allowing us to take that much-needed break. She promises that she has no more than 15, 20 minutes left. Representative, you may resume.
Thank you. If we could go to page A9 of the Deferred Prosecution Agreement Statement of Facts, and I'd like to focus on the sentence that starts about the fourth line down, but the context of what's going on is this paragraph is talking about the associates of Madigan who are paid by ComEd for doing little to no work. It says, prior to ComEd's discovery of the federal law enforcement investigation, public official A, meaning Madigan, and individual A, meaning McLean's approval, was sought by ComEd before payments to certain of Madigan's associates were discontinued, even though these individuals performed little to no work with ComEd. Are you with me?
Yes.
All right. So number one, when this is talking about public official A's associates were discontinued, are these individuals who were separate from the three associates referred to elsewhere in the Deferred Prosecution Agreement?
So this is not a question I can answer based on the information available to me today.
Okay. But to be clear, when it comes to this particular paragraph, this is saying that when ComEd wanted to stop paying some of Speaker Madigan's associates who were doing little or no work for ComEd, ComEd secured both Madigan and McLean's approval before they discontinued those payments.
So the DPA says what it says on that
Right.
point.
Right. It says and, not or. Right.
Right. And I don't want to. The DPA says what we have said on these points, and I don't want to characterize beyond those statements.
Right. That's fair. And let me put it this way. You have no reason to doubt today that both public official A, Madigan's, and McLean's approval was sought by ComEd before the payments to public official A's associates were discontinued.
That's correct. We
Okay.
acknowledge that in the DPA.
All right. And by the way, when we were talking about Speaker Madigan's associates, the Frank Olivo, does ComEd know whether that's the Frank Olivo who was the former 13th Ward Alderman?
I don't believe I can answer that on the basis of the information available for my use at this hearing.
Okay. All right. Let's go ahead then and keep on moving. Let's talk about just the board member, where board member, board member 1. Can you just confirm that that's Juan, and I'll spell the last name, Ochoa?
Yes.
Okay. And can you confirm that before the request was made by Mr. McLean, ostensibly on behalf of Speaker Madigan, to put Juan Ochoa on the board, that ComEd did not have any open board seats?
I'm not sure I can confirm that.
Okay. Do you know whether ComEd created a new board seat for board member 1 so that board member 1 could have a position, or did he replace an existing board member?
My understanding is that it was not a new seat.
Okay.
So it was an existing seat.
Okay. If we can take a look at page A10, this is it's the top paragraph on the page, not the first full paragraph, but I do want to ask about the statement that the CEO made. You take good care of me, and so does our friend, meaning Madigan, and I will do the best that I can to take care of you. So again, our friend is Michael Madigan, right?
Yes.
All right. And at least part of the reason why Juan Ochoa was put on ComEd's board was to influence and reward Michael Madigan in connection with his official duties?
So the DPA acknowledges that this was part of the part of a course of conduct with
Right.
that overall intent, and specifically acknowledges that ComEd appointed board member one in part with the intent to influence and reward Speaker Madigan
Okay.
in a connection with his official duties.
Right. And just out of curiosity, in general, can you say, sitting here today, that Ann Promaggiore did not speak to Mike Madigan about the events in the DPA to confirm that they were authorized? Or that these were things that he specifically wanted?
That's not a question that I can answer on the basis of the information that's
All right.
available.
That's fine. All right, let's jump to the retention of the law firm, which is at the bottom of page A10. So the law firm A, was that Reyes Kusten, or I'm sorry, Kusen?
Reyes Curson.
Kurson, sorry.
Can I have one moment?
Sure.
Okay, sorry for the interruption.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Sure. Can you just confirm that law firm A?
Mr. Glockner, we're hearing the court reporter is having difficulty hearing.
Sorry.
Do your best to try to get as close to that mic as
Okay.
possible.
Yep.
Sure. So just to repeat, can you confirm that law firm A referred to on page A10 is Reyes Kurson?
Yes.
Thank you. And was lawyer A being referred to Victor Reyes?
Is there a lawyer A referred to here?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, I believe so.
Okay. All right. And again, the retention of law firm A, and in particular, the 850 hours of attorney work per year, it was ComEd's understanding giving this contract to Reyes Kurson was important to Speaker Madigan, right?
Yes, the DPA reflects that personnel and agents of ComEd understood that giving the contract to law firm A was important to Speaker Madigan.
All right. And if we go from page A10 to page A11, it says 2016, the Reyes Kurson contract was up for renewal, and people at ComEd actually wanted to change his contract so that ComEd was paying only for the hours that were actually worked. Is that right?
So what the DPA acknowledges is that the individuals within ComEd sought to reduce the hours of work they provided to Reyes Kurson from the 850 specified in the retention agreement because ComEd paid only 4 hours worked, and that there wasn't enough work that was appropriate for the firm to give them to fill up that 850 hours. I don't believe that ComEd was paying for hours not worked.
Okay. So under the 2011 retention agreement, do you recall what the hourly rate was for Mr. Reyes or his law firm?
I do not.
Was there a minimum guaranteed payment amount under that contract, under that retainer agreement?
I don't have the contract in front of me.
Okay. Do you know whether that actually is in the retainer agreement?
But I'm not aware of any such requirement.
Okay. Do you know whether over the course of the contract between 2011 to 2016, ComEd paid the law firm for 850 hours, even though the firm had not worked the 850 hours?
As I said before, I don't believe that ComEd was paying for hours that were not worked.
Okay. And then, so if we look then on page A11, first full paragraph, it says thereafter, An attorney associated with law firm A, lawyer A, meaning Victor Reyes, complained to McLean about ComEd's effort to reduce the amount of work provided to his law firm. And then on or about January 20th, 2016, McLean contacted Ann Promaggiore and wrote, quote, "I am sure you know how valuable lawyer A, meaning Victor Reyes, is to our friend, meaning Madigan." And then went on to write, quote, "I know the drill and so do you. If you do not get involved and resolve this issue of 850 hours for his law firm per year, then he will go to our friend, meaning Madigan. Our friend, meaning Madigan, will call me, and then I will call you. Is this a drill we must go through?" And Ann Promaggiore replied in writing, "Sorry, no one informed me. I am on this." Is that true?
Yes, those statements were made.
Okay. And then if you look at the bottom of page A11, it says that law firm A's contract was renewed because the work provided to law firm A was, in part, designed to influence and reward public official A, meaning Madigan, in connection with Madigan's official duties, including the promotion and passage of FIJA. See that?
Yes.
All right, now it says ComEd agreed in or around June 2016 to renew law firm A's contract with substantially reduced annual hours. Do you see that?
Yes.
Do you know whether even with that reduced annual hours, the Reyes-Kurson law firm still wound up getting paid the same amount as under the 2011 retainer agreements?
I don't know that. I mean, the subsequent agreement, I think, reduced the hours to 47.5 per month, of which 15 would be administrative hearings, which works out to about 570 hours per year, so down from the 850.
Okay. And then did the hourly rates also go up?
I don't have that information with me, but I'm not aware that they did.
Okay. So let me ask you this. So when it comes to, I mean, do you know how much Reyes-Kurson was paid in 2016 as compared to 2015?
I'm sorry, I don't have the information with me today.
Okay. Is that information you'd be willing to share with the committee?
Yeah, assuming the information is not privileged, which is my guess, that we would be willing to share it with the committee.
Yeah, I'd just be interested in seeing what the actual retainer agreements look like, and if the hourly rates changed or if the dollar amounts actually paid. I would not be interested in the substance of any
Right.
communications, obviously.
Right.
All right. Now, would it be fair to say, in your experience, Commonwealth Edison is a pretty sophisticated company?
Yeah, I don't want to get into characterizing the company. We are a Fortune 500, I think Fortune 100 company. It's a company that does a lot of complicated things, but sophisticated is a matter of judgment, and the DPA sort of speaks for itself with respect to its conduct in this matter.
Right. Well, would it be fair to say that the executives that you have dealt with at ComEd, they're not naive, they're sharp, they're smart people?
The executives that I have dealt with at ComEd and Exelon have impressed me quite a bit. I would also note that the executives who were responsible for this conduct are no longer with the firm.
Right. Does ComEd have a position that it can share today regarding whether Ann Promaggiore was snookered by Mike McLean being boastful that he had connections and authority to speak on behalf of the speaker that he didn't have?
So I can't go beyond what ComEd has said in the DPA, and the DPA reflects that ComEd as an entity at the time that this conduct occurred acted with the intention to influence the speaker.
Right. And one of the reasons why Commonwealth had that intention to influence the speaker is because Commonwealth Edison anticipated receiving over $150 million worth of benefits as a result of this scheme. Is that fair?
I would not agree with that.
Well, let's take a look at page A12 of the deferred prosecution agreement. And I'd like to direct your attention to the section that says benefit to ComEd. It says between, in or around 2011 and in or around 2019, during the same time frame that ComEd was making payments to public official A, Madigan's associates, and extending other benefits for the purpose of influencing and rewarding public official A, meaning Madigan, ComEd was also seeking public official A, meaning Madigan's support for legislation that was beneficial to ComEd, including EIMA and FEJA, that would ensure a continued favorable rate structure for ComEd. ComEd acknowledges that the reasonably foreseeable anticipated benefits to ComEd of such legislation exceeded $150 million.
Yes, that I would agree with.
All right. Now, when it came to receiving these foreseeable anticipated benefits of legislation that exceeded $150 million, Mike McLean did not have the power to deliver any of those benefits, did he?
So Mr. McLean at that point was not a public official?
Right. So Mike Madigan would be a public official who potentially could have the power to deliver the benefits of the EIMA and FEJA legislation. Is that fair?
So I would I think take issue with your use of the word deliver, which is not a word that's used in DPA. Both of these pieces of legislation were supported by a wide range of people. What ComEd has acknowledged in the DPA is that it viewed Speaker Madigan as influential. It sought to influence him. But there's a difference, I think, between seeking to influence one individual and stating, as I think that the question may have implied, that the speaker was in a position by himself to deliver a particular piece of legislation.
Okay. Did ComEd have an understanding that Speaker Madigan, under the House rules, had the authority to not call legislation to the floor, which would effectively kill the legislation?
So in the DPA, ComEd acknowledged that Speaker Madigan was able to exercise control over what measures were called for a vote in the House of Representatives.
Right. And that's pretty influential, right?
I,
ComEd can't get legislation
right.
passed if the speaker won't call it, right?
I don't want to take issue with your characterizations, but
Right.
but I also, the DPA is very sort of carefully and tightly crafted, and I don't want to add or agree to characterizations that go beyond what we've said in the DPA.
Sure. Well, maybe we can try to get at some of these things this way. Mike McLean didn't have any power to bring any legislation to the floor or not allow legislation to come to the House floor. Is that fair?
That is fair based on my understanding of Mike McLean's
Right.
role as a private citizen at that time.
Right. And Michael Madigan is the one who actually held a public office to use and abuse. Is that fair?
Speaker Madigan was a public official. I don't want to. I don't want to accept the remainder of the sentence, which is a characterization.
All right. Well, let's try to get at it this way. Take a look at page 6 of the deferred prosecution agreement. And it's under the heading Payment of Monetary Penalty. Item 9, subpart A, where the offense level is being calculated under the sentencing guidelines. Page 6.
sorry.
It's okay.
Yes.
All right. So do you see there, item B3, involvement of an elected public official in a high-level decision-making or sensitive position. The elected public official in a high-level decision-making or sensitive position was Illinois Speaker Mike Madigan, right?
Yes, although I think there are some legal issues relating to the application of the guideline.
Yeah, I'm not trying to say whether the guideline is accurate or not. It's just in terms of the quantification of the calculation levels or anything like that, just that it says that the elected public official in a high-level decision-making or sensitive position that would be referred to in the context of this DPA was Mike Madigan.
So what I think is the accurate statement here is that this particular language that you're pointing to reflects our agreement that this section of the sentencing guidelines, section 2C 1.1B3, was applicable. I don't believe that was meant as or should be read as a statement of fact. It's an agreement as to the legal applicability of that particular provision of the United States sentencing guidelines.
Sure, and the only factual, and if you look at the deferred prosecution agreement, the only elected public official in a high-level decision-making or sensitive position that is referred to in the deferred prosecution agreement is Illinois House Speaker Mike Madigan, right?
That's correct.
Okay. All right, Chairman, I think I've gotten to my 15 minutes, so I'll wait. I'll cede the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. I will say you've been thorough. Representative Hernandez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Glonker, glad to have you here. I'm going to start off because I noticed that it was repeatedly said that ComEd's intent. Does ComEd intent, does that constitute to unbecoming of a lawmaker?
So I can't comment on matters relating to the interpretation of the House rules.
Okay. So, Mr. Glockner, did ComEd admit guilt in a bribery scheme lasting 9 years, or did they enter a not guilty plea?
So ComEd has acknowledged facts in the DPA. A criminal charge has been filed pursuant to the terms of the DPA. If ComEd complies with the DPA after 3 years, the charge will be dismissed. With no conviction, ComEd has not pled guilty.
Okay. So for clarity's sake, ComEd has agreed that it does not contest the facts laid out in the DPA, right?
I would actually, yes, we affirmatively have agreed to those facts.
Okay. From ComEd's perspective, even if we accept all the facts laid out in the DPA to be accurate, ComEd believes it to be not guilty of any federal crime. That is, if ComEd's position, as you understand it.
So I would certainly not say that. I would say that we have acknowledged facts. We have not pled guilty. We do not expect at the end of these proceedings to be convicted. But I can't and won't characterize ComEd's view of the sort of legal implications of those facts. We have not pled guilty.
Okay, so moving to other questions. Over the years, ComEd has likely received recommendations from legislators for jobs, contracts, charitable contributions, etc. To your knowledge, is that a correct assumption?
Yes.
Okay. For the record, in your opinion, is it a crime for a legislator to make a job recommendation to ComEd or recommendations?
One moment here. Yes, so any specific instance of an exchange between public officials and other people requires its own kind of specific analysis. But you know, one thing that I think I can say is that in connection with our compliance efforts to sort of strengthen our compliance program after this incident, we have put into place a process that requires anyone in the ComEd or broader Exelon organization who receives a request, referral, recommendation from a public official of any sort, not just a legislator, for anything that is something of value and not kind of ordinary course constituent service request or part of their ordinary official duties. Those matters are now required to be reported to ComEd through a tracking system that captures the interaction, captures our analysis, and captures our disposition of it. I think implicit in that is sort of both that these interactions can require close analysis, but also that they are not inherently illegal.
Okay, so that's what you're implementing now. So prior then, if a legislator made a job recommendation to ComEd or any other company with any threat or promises, implicit or explicit, attached, is it simply not a crime? Is it?
Yeah, I'm really not, my role here is really not to be a kind of expert on the law for the committee. I can talk to you about ComEd's practices and information that's sort of within my knowledge in my role, but I don't think it's really appropriate for me to give sort of broad legal advice.
Okay, so let me just to make it clear, did I hear you say then it's not inherently illegal for a legislator to make a recommendation?
Yes, but I put that in the context of our processes, which in the wake of this, there's a clear recognition that these are interactions that need to be handled with caution and great care. And carefully analyzed. The mere fact of an interaction standing alone is not illegal, though, and that's we're in the training that we are doing internally and our communications with public officials. It's important that we be able to continue to communicate with public officials. That's not inherently illegal. But it's also important that those communications not cross a line, and that we make sure that in responding to those communications, we act with the kind of greatest care and utmost integrity in our own response to those communications.
Okay, so in your opinion, would you say then, is it unethical for a legislator to make a job recommendation?
So I can't comment on legislative ethics.
Okay. So ComEd has various lobbyists that work for the company. Some work internally as full-time employees of ComEd, and some are contractual workers. Many of these contractual workers are lobbyists. Is this accurate?
That's my understanding.
How many are currently employed? Would you say?
I don't have that information.
Okay. What is the reason that ComEd hires both internal and contractual lobbyists?
I can't speak to the reasons for the specific structure of how that's handled. I mean, it's not a matter that I'm familiar with at this point.
Okay. Did ComEd hire lobbyists with ties to all of the legislative caucuses, or only those with connections to Speaker Madigan?
So I think it's fair to say that ComEd has lobbyists with a variety of political backgrounds and perspectives and sources of expertise.
So would you say that did ComEd hire lobbyists with connections to Leader Durkin?
Just one moment. So I think, unfortunately, I don't know enough at this point about the way our lobbying operation is structured in terms of assignments and relationship to be able to provide you with an answer to that I'm comfortable.
So I was going to answer.
Confident in.
All right. So you wouldn't know about President Cullerton or prior President Cullerton, or now President Harmon, or even Leader Brady.
I wouldn't know what about them.
Hire, did ComEd hire lobbyists with these connections? So you wouldn't know them. Yes.
So what I think I can say is that ComEd has had lobbyists with relationships with many different political leaders from both parties.
So would you say, the strategy of hiring lobbyists to assist the company was not solely aimed at Speaker Madigan, was it?
So I'm not sure I would agree with the use of the term aimed at. I mean, the company uses lobbyists to provide information to a range of legislators and other people involved
So it would-
in the policy process.
Okay.
And
Okay.
but I think that's probably the best way to describe that.
So you would say it was aimed to all legislators, including Leader Durkin?
I wouldn't use the word aimed,
Okay.
but I would say that ComEd attempts to engage with legislators kind of across the political spectrum.
So to use the words that the government uses to describe this everyday event, ComEd through its lobbyists, wanted to curry favor with the legislative leaders. Is that right?
So are you quoting from a document, or this is a
It's
characterization?
it's a question, to use the words of the government, or what the government uses to describe this everyday event of, this ComEd, through its lobbyists, want to curry favor with legislative leaders.
So, I mean, there are several layers in that question. I mean, partly with the term currying favor. I think if you look at the language in the DPA and the specific admissions set out in the DPA, we have acknowledged that ComEd attempted to influence Speaker Madigan, but I think I would characterize the work of our lobbying team generally as being to provide information and to advocate for policy interests on with government officials on the company's behalf.
Okay. So did other legislative leaders or legislators ask ComEd or Exelon to hire particular lobbyists?
One moment. So I think the answer to that is that I'm not aware of requests directly from legislators to hire specific lobbyists, but I also I can't represent that I've got full information on that point.
So are you aware then if any recommendations that maybe Leader Durkin may have made to ComEd?
So when you say Leader Durkin may have made, I'm not aware of any communication from Leader Durkin to ComEd with respect to a lobbyist. Right, no direct communication.
Okay. So you are aware, are you not, that ComEd, at the recommendation of Fidel Marquez, hire former Republican legislator Tom Walsh, in part because Leader Durkin urged ComEd to do so. Did you know that?
So I am aware of, let me try and make sure that I'm recalling this accurately. But my recollection is that we have a communication from a third party. I don't recall whether it was Mr. Marquez or somebody else, indicating that Leader Durkin had recommended Mr. Walsh.
And so when the FIJA bill was being debated in the Illinois House of Representatives, Tom Walsh was among the army of lobbyists that ComEd deployed to help pass the bill. Are you aware of that?
I'm not familiar with who lobbied on that particular matter.
And ultimately, Leader Durkin voted for the FIJA bill, right?
I don't have individuals votes on that legislation in front of me.
Okay, and it's presumed that Tom Walsh urged him to do so, right?
That's your presumption. I have no information.
So Governor Rauner and Leader Durkin took credit for passing that bill, saying that they had to move mountains to accomplish that. Are you aware of that?
I have read that quote.
And so the agreement to hire Leader Durkin's recommended candidate, Tom Walsh, even if done in part to curry favor with Durkin, was not done in return for getting Leader Durkin's support for a stream of benefits that Durkin would bestow upon ComEd or Exelon, including supporting FIJA, right?
So, I'm not aware that that particular hire was made with an effort to curry favor with Leader Durkin. I think really the rest of your question was really a characterization, which I prefer not to respond to.
Okay. So, has ComEd ever actively solicited job recommendations from public officials? And if you have, can you describe them?
I don't know the answer to that question.
For example, like the smart meters, there was an effort to, before the grid came out, a hiring of smart meters. So ComEd never asked for recommendations from public officials that you're aware of?
So what I'm saying is I don't know the answer to that question. That's not an area that I'm familiar with in my 6 months at the company.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Worley.
Thank you, Chairman. If I could return us back to the deferred prosecution agreement, which is why I believe you are called here to testify. Is that correct?
Just here to answer questions.
Okay. Has, in the deferred prosecution agreement, can you point to anywhere in the document that either identifies or mentions Jim Durkin?
No.
In the defined prosecution agreement, can you identify or point to any area that mentions Bill Brady?
No.
In the defined prosecution agreement, can you identify or point to any mentions of Senate President John Cullerton?
No.
In the defined prosecution agreement, can you identify or point to any mentions of now Senate President Don Harmon?
No.
I'm sorry?
No.
In the defined prosecution agreement, can you identify or point to any mentions of Tom Walsh?
No.
Can you point to, in the defined prosecution agreement, 72 mentions of public official A Speaker Michael J. Madigan?
I haven't counted.
Can you point to multiple mentions of public official A Speaker Michael J. Madigan?
Yes, the focus of the deferred prosecution agreement was the effort by ComEd to influence Speaker Madigan.
Okay. In your opening statement, you mentioned that not only were you a U.S. attorney for the criminal division here in the Northern District of Illinois, but you were also a securities exchange lawyer. Is that, for how long were you in that role?
So just to correct, I was not the U.S. attorney.
Okay.
I was an assistant U.S. attorney and served as chief of the criminal division.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And were you a lawyer for the Securities and Exchange Commission?
I was the regional director for the Securities and Exchange Commission for the Chicago office.
Okay, so in that role, are you familiar with penalties being paid by public corporations in both civil and criminal matters?
Yes, I mean, the SEC doesn't have criminal authority, but it has civil authority.
In that role, is it, all right, Do you agree that on page 7 of the DPA, the government and ComEd agree, based on the application of the guidelines, that the appropriate total criminal penalty is $200 million? Is that correct?
So I would not characterize so I would not, sorry, I'm looking for the page here.
Page 7.
So the total criminal penalty based on the application of the guidelines is 200 million. So if the guidelines applied, which they would if this were a criminal case in which the guidelines applied because there was a conviction, then the penalty, the applicable penalty under the sentencing guidelines would be $200 million.
Has ComEd agreed to pay a penalty of $200 million?
So we have agreed to make a payment to the Treasury of $200 million, yes.
And that is as part of this deferred prosecution agreement, correct?
Yes.
Are you aware of any lobbyists on the Republican side of the aisle who subverted the ComEd vendor payment system?
No.
Who hired people who did little or no work for Commonwealth Edison?
Commonwealth Edison did.
Has any Republican member of the General Assembly placed into positions with ComEd anyone that did precinct or political work?
One moment. So the challenge of your question is that they're very broad questions that go considerably beyond the DPA.
So I'll rephrase it. Does the DPA, Deferred Prosecution Agreement, delineate any Republican members of the General Assembly seeking jobs with Commonwealth Edison?
No.
No further questions.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Manley seeking recognition. Leader.
Hi, Mr. Glockner.
Hello.
How are you doing? This is fun, isn't it?
It's been fascinating.
Do you need some coffee?
I'm good.
Okay. So I'm going to kind of jump around a little bit here. Did anyone other than McLean or Madigan refer Mr. Ochoa to the open existing seat on ComEd's board?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Sure.
I want to make sure that I understand it
Did
carefully.
anyone, to your knowledge, did anyone other than Mike McLean or Mike Madigan refer Mr. Ochoa to the open existing seat on ComEd's board?
All right, so, sorry for the delay. So I am aware of, let me make sure I'm correctly. So I'm aware of an email from an office manager for Speaker Madigan's Pulaski Street office, which sent Mr. Ochoa's resume to Ms. Pramajor. And the email said, Speaker Madigan asked me to send this to you. I can't go beyond.
I said anybody other than McLean or Madigan
So
recommend.
Right, this was from Speaker Madigan's assistant, so.
Recommend or
to be-
refer
right,
is
to
what I'm
be-
looking for. Do you know anybody that recommended, not forwarded a resume, but recommended or referred?
Right, and I was trying to be literally careful in responding to that. So I think that answer was a literally correct, I think the information I provided was responsive to that answer. I can't go beyond that without getting into information that I can't speak to because of either privilege or other considerations.
Do you have knowledge of other legislators making recommendations through third parties for any type of job or contract? Not looking for names, just a yes or no.
So knowledge of other legislators,
Making recommendations through third parties for any job or contract.
again, I'm trying to think about what information I might have that I would be in a position to share versus the areas where I'm not in a position to speak to. I can't, as I sit here, say definitively one way or the other, just because the ComEd had lots of contacts with lots of legislators, and I want to be very careful to be accurate and
I appreciate
precise
that.
in comments here. So, I don't want to speculate.
I'm going to loop back because I just want some understanding. Representative Hernandez asked you if you were aware that ComEd, at the recommendation of Fidel Marquez, hired former Republican legislator Tom Walsh, in part because Leader Durkin urged ComEd to do so. And you said you are aware of some communication from a third party that said Leader Durkin recommend is. I want to be clear.
Yes, no, and I appreciate that, and that is my recollection. I don't believe I have that particular communication with me.
So did you believe that person was speaking on behalf of Leader Durkin?
So I can't say what ComEd believed. I mean, what I can say is that there was a communication that referred to a relationship between Speaker Durkin, Leader Durkin and this lobbyist.
So this person was speaking on Leader Durkin's behalf.
I'm not sure that's accurate. There's a distinction between speaking on somebody's behalf and passing on information, and without having the
That's
document.
important. That's important. Okay. So let's talk about lobbyists, the dreaded lobbyists. In my time here, lobbyists, although sometimes it evokes a negative connotation, so they're up to some nefarious things, but they're critical to the process because we handle complicated things, and a good lobbyist will tell you not only why you should support what they're there to talk to you about. But they would, in turn, also tell you what the naysayers would say. So you get kind of both sides of it. And they won't lie to you, by the way. So you get truth and you build relationships, and this is how we learn things. And so when a big company like ComEd or some other big issue comes up, they hire armies of lobbyists to come and see us. And it's pretty much based on relationships over time, through other work, things like that. Is there anything illegal about hiring a lobbyist for those reasons?
No.
Has it ever been a crime to do that?
No, but I will say lobbyists at various points have gotten into trouble. But the act of lobbying done appropriately, as you described,
Is vital to the process.
It's a well-established part of the process and is not illegal.
Okay. I told you I was going to jump around a little bit. I have notes everywhere. Would you say it's inappropriate or illegal to recommend people for jobs?
So again, it's a broad characterization, and there may be contexts where the answer to that is yes. There are certainly contexts where the answer to that is no.
So you're saying sometimes it's illegal to recommend people for jobs or inappropriate? Let's say there's somebody that worked for you that was excellent in whatever capacity, and you supervised them, and they were young and up and coming, and would you think that's inappropriate or illegal to recommend that person to another person who was looking for somebody that really could benefit?
No, I mean, I certainly wouldn't suggest that the mere act of recommending somebody with absolutely no kind of other context around it is unlawful.
And so let me ask you this. If you were an employer, so you're the duly chosen person here representing ComEd, do you think as an employer you have the responsibility to ensure that the people that you hire work?
Yes.
And is it the employer's job to monitor and keep employees accountable?
Absolutely.
Is it the recommender's job?
No.
Would you accept recommendations from someone whose previous recommendations ended up doing little or no work?
I certainly wouldn't.
So there's nothing really inappropriate by making job recommendations, but why was ComEd not monitoring their employees?
So I can't speak to why. I can speak to a number of things that we've done to make sure that there is very active supervision of our lobbying and public affairs teams going forward, in both in terms of a much more rigorous vetting process to get them in the door, process that requires detailed invoices setting out the work they've done, twice annual reviews of their activities with documentation associated with that, involvement of senior business leadership as well as the compliance team in that review process, and contracts that have much more expansive language with respect to the obligations of lobbyists and the scope of their work, their compliance with various ethics and legal requirements. So those are some of the things that we have done in response to looking at what happened here to make sure that this doesn't happen again and that going forward, we're not going to have issues with what we want and need to be a first-class and responsible public policy operation.
ComEd's position is that there's nothing in the facts of the DPA that constitutes a violation of federal law because there was no quid pro quo. Is that right?
I would not say that. What I have said is that the DPA speaks for itself. We acknowledge the facts in the DPA. We acknowledge the seriousness of that conduct. We have characterized it publicly as misconduct. Our officers, and we have apologized for the conduct and taken significant steps to make sure that it never happens again, including in part by bringing me in to run the compliance and audit program for the corporation. But the deferred prosecution agreement is not a guilty plea document. It's just, as a legal matter, it's distinct. And I really want to be very careful not to characterize one way or the other our view of the legalities here.
I have more questions, but I'm going to wrap it up here. I want to clarify something. Many of your comments today referred to what ComEd believed or intended. I think Representative Hernandez tried to get to that earlier. You are not presenting firsthand observations about Speaker Madigan's conduct, correct?
Correct. I'm not presenting firsthand observations about anything.
Thank you for your patience.
For our last speaker tonight, Minority Spokesperson Dimmer. Representative?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you both for your detailed answers. I don't have many questions. I'd just like to ask a few follow-ups based on the conversation today. There's been discussion about the difference or the practices that ComEd is engaged in as it relates to lobbying, to hiring lobbyists, what those lobbyists do and with whom they have relationships. But would you agree there's a difference between hiring a lobbyist in order to do lobbying work and hiring a lobbyist with the intent to reward and influence a public official?
Yes.
You in the deferred prosecution agreement have admitted to having hired individuals in order to reward and influence Speaker Madigan.
Yes. I mean, I don't recall whether it says in part or just without any qualification, but yes, that's part of the DPA.
Okay. Separately, on page A8 of the additional the information, there's a statement that says, during a certain meeting, Mike McLean explained that for decades, Mike Madigan had named individuals to be ComEd employees, such as meter readers, as a part of an old-fashioned patronage system. In response, a ComEd employee acknowledged that such hires could be used as a chip by ComEd. So the ComEd employee has acknowledged that such hires existed. Do you affirm that such hires existed where Mike Madigan for decades had named individuals to be ComEd employees?
So what I can affirm is that these statements were made based on the restrictions that I think have been that I'm operating under today with respect to the sources of my information. I don't think I can go beyond that.
But it would be fair to say that at this time, at the time this conversation took place, a ComEd employee acknowledged that such hires existed.
So the DPA says what it says here, and I'd really rather not characterize further the communication that's set out in the DPA.
Okay. And those, the DPA indicates that those ComEd employees, such as meter readers, one would assume that was a legitimate job as a meter reader, someone who is working as a meter reader.
Again, I think the sort of a slippery slope here in terms of starting to characterize parts of this and not others. And
so I would distinguish, or I'd draw a contrast between that section discussing the recommendations for jobs like meter readers with the information that's contained on page A4, which would be hiring of public official A's, Madigan's associates as vendor subcontractors who performed little or no work from ComEd. That there's a distinction between making a job recommendation for a job that the person works in versus making a job recommendation for a job that requires little or no work.
There is a distinction, although I think what the DPA does not address in the factual summary is whether the recommendation was whether a part of the recommendation was that they do no work, or whether ComEd simply did not ask them to work.
And so that's sort of the question I wanted to get to, because in the second paragraph of that section on page A4, as a previous representative has pointed out, it acknowledges that Madigan sought to obtain from ComEd jobs, vendor subcontracts, and monetary payments. Can you identify those jobs, subcontracts, or monetary payments that Mike Madigan sought from ComEd?
So I don't think I can do so beyond what's set out in the DPA.
And what's set out in the DPA is that section regarding the solicitation of jobs, contracts, and monetary payments is in a section which is about vendor subcontractors who performed little or no work for ComEd.
Yes, that is the title of the section, and the particular subcontractors addressed in this section appear to have performed little or no work.
And those individuals identified in this section, at least some of them, their employment or monetary payment or contract was sought by Mike Madigan.
The DPA speaks for itself on that point, and I don't want to characterize the DPA further.
We also had a discussion at the beginning of this hearing about direct involvement by Speaker Madigan in this process, and we've had a few examples of that have come out through the testimony you've given today. First, that Mike Madigan sought to obtain from ComEd jobs, vendor contracts, and monetary payments. Second, that ComEd sought the approval of Mike Madigan when discontinuing a contract. Third, that ComEd agreed that Mike Madigan would be the individual who notified former Alderman Zaleski that he was being hired to a subcontract position. And fourth, something not contained in the DPA, but a statement that you made that Speaker Madigan instructed his office director to forward the resume of Mr. Ochoa for consideration on the board.
So
would all four of those? Okay.
So I don't believe that was my testimony. My testimony was that there was an email from his office assistant to that effect.
That said, Speaker Madigan, something to the effect of, asked me to send this to you.
Right, but I can't speak to anything beyond the text of that statement.
Okay. Would one or all of those examples show that there was direct knowledge of and participation in these activities by Speaker Madigan?
So, again, you're asking for a characterization by me, and I'm really not prepared to characterize the evidence beyond what is set out in the DPA. And I think the inferences to be drawn from that are for others.
But we have, as we've discussed, we have specific references to not Mike Madigan through an intermediary or via a third party, but public official A, Mike Madigan, being directly involved in the action.
So what the DPA acknowledges is that as far as ComEd believed, in the paragraph that you pointed to on page A4, that that ComEd was attempting to influence Speaker Madigan and believed that Speaker Madigan was associated with certain of these requests.
I'd like to look at page A8 as well, to ask in the final paragraph that indicates that the indirect payments were made not only through Company 1, Jay Doherty's company, but through other additional third-party vendors. Can you identify any additional third-party vendors?
So, I want to try and get this right here because this is a little complicated. There were, hang on one sec. I'm trying to, so, sorry, just want to make sure that I'm precise here. Could you repeat that question?
Yes, so on page A8, it's indicated that indirect payments were made not only through Company 1, but through other additional third-party vendors. I'd like to know who those other additional third-party vendors are.
So there were 4 additional third-party vendors that I'm aware of through whom certain lobbyist subcontractors were paid. what those subcontractors did or may not have done, I can't speak to that without going into, sorry, can't speak to that without going into areas that I can't go. But the four other entities that employed lobbyists as subcontractors were Our Camp and McLean, AWERKAMP and McLean, the Roosevelt Group, Shaw de Creamer Consulting, and the John Bradley Law Firm.
Thank you. We had a earlier question about the plea that has currently been entered by ComEd, plea of not guilty. Could I clarify that on page 2 of the deferred prosecution agreement, it says, should the government pursue the prosecution that is deferred by this agreement, ComEd agrees that it will neither contest the admissibility of nor contradict the statement of facts in any such proceeding, including any trial, guilty plea, or sentencing proceeding. So if ComEd were to not comply with its side of the deferred prosecution agreement, the government would be free to bring those charges, and there's a potential that ComEd would enter a guilty plea at that time. Is that true? Not saying that you would enter a guilty plea. However, the possibility of a guilty plea for the charges identified is not a foreclosed conclusion.
Well, so that I don't think that's really a question that is appropriate for me to answer. So first, I would say that we have every expectation of complying with the terms of the DPA. That's extraordinarily important to our board, to our senior officers, and to me in my role. But what the DPA makes clear is that should we violate the DPA, should we then be prosecuted by the government, this particular document could be offered into evidence against us essentially in its entirety and treated as admissions in sort of any form of proceeding that would follow. And there are a variety of forms of proceedings that could follow.
Would it be fair to say that the penalty or the fine that you agreed to pay here of $200 million is the largest fine that ComEd has agreed to pay in its history?
Although I don't have knowledge of every fine the company has paid in its history, I am quite confident that is far and away the largest.
And this is not a deferred prosecution agreement that, because of the size of the fine and the significant admissions contained within this is not an agreement that ComEd has entered into lightly or without great introspection and thought.
That's correct. This has been something that has been very carefully considered at the highest levels of the company.
For how long did ComEd investigate the facts that were set forth here prior to agreeing to the deferred prosecution agreement?
So I don't think there's much I can say about that without going into matters that are attorney-client privileged, but I think ComEd has publicly said that shortly after the receipt of the initial subpoena, there's a special committee of the board created, and ComEd began an internal investigation.
Thank you. Can you talk about some of the compliance steps you've taken with regard to recommendations from legislators, requests from legislators for various things? Could you talk about any additional compliance steps that have been imposed as it relates to political consulting work or law firm work?
Sure. So we really treat lobbyists and political consultants essentially as interchangeable for purposes of our policies. We have 4 policies that we put into effect in early July. One of them is a high-level policy that addresses, as a general matter, interactions between public officials and employees and representatives of all Exelon companies, including ComEd. Another policy relates specifically to relationships between lobbyists and consultants and ComEd and how we manage those relationships. And then we have a separate policy that relates to requests, recommendations, and referrals from public officials relating to employment. And another policy relating to requests, recommendations, and referrals from public officials relating to the selection and use of vendors. So all of those are kind of part of a series of things that we have done to try to strengthen the controls around interactions with public officials, to provide much clearer guidance to our employees on these issues, and also to make sure that we have stronger oversight of these activities, so that you can't have a situation anymore where a relatively small number of people could engage in activity like this without the ability of the compliance team or senior officials sort of in separate parts of the organization having the ability to intervene and provide a check.
Thank you. And just to wrap up, your disclosure of the existence of an email from an office manager of Speaker Madigan related to the appointment of Mr. Ochoa, I think is of interest to this committee. Our charge is to better understand the circumstances that are set forward in the deferred prosecution agreement. So without making an overly broad request that may interfere with the internal investigation that you've done, the internal attorney privileged communications that you have, are there other existence of other emails or messages or communications of any form from Speaker Madigan or someone who's identified with Speaker Madigan related to the conduct set forth in the deferred prosecution agreement?
So I think the answer is that there are certain communications that do fit within that kind of broadly defined parameter. I don't have them all with me today.
Would you be willing to provide the committee with that information?
So yes, I mean, I think we want to have kind of a clear understanding of what the specific request is, so that we can make sure that we're complying. But to the extent that the committee has requests of us for documents that are not privileged and we can appropriately provide, we will respond.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leader Demmer, Mr. Glockner, Mr. Shar. On behalf of the Special Investigating Committee number 2, I want to extend my sincere thanks for you traveling here today, for you being here and answering to the best of your ability the questions before the committee. I don't see any other members seeking recognition to question you, so you are free to go.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Glockner, Mr. Shar, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
I want to also note that the chair is in receipt of a note of apology from Mr. Safer. And Mr. Safer is being recognized for the limited purpose to address the note that was sent to the chair.
Thank you. I wanted to
Turn the mic on.
Mr. Charge here as well, because I feel very badly that I told him that he could communicate through us to the chair about his attendance. I feel that that was disrespectful of the chairman and the committee, and I have great respect for both, and I regret doing that, put Mr. Shar in a bad position as well, so I apologize for doing that. Thank you for recognizing me.
Thank you, Mr. Safer, and I do appreciate the note and apology accepted. We're going to take just another 5-minute recess, and we will reconvene shortly, just for another break, quick break.